Okay, this is Emmy Thomas. I'm talking with Tony, who is my guest today, and we are continuing. This is part two of sociopath lessons or psychopath lessons. And Tony, do you want to kind of talk about, uh, just like a quick refresher on what we talked about in part one, and then maybe talk about how it's worked out for you so far? Some of those lessons, the psychopath lessons from part one.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, last time, yeah, I wanted psychopath lessons because I felt like I was a little bit too concerned with how how much I thought about what other people thought about things that I did. I'm quite deferential. I'm the kind of person that says sorry probably a little bit too much in certain situations. And after reading your book and doing some research, I thought that, the someone with psychopathy kind of has a bit of a superpower, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about that and how you see the world and the kind of things, just your perception of yourself and the world and how you go through life. And one of the things you said that really resonated with me was the fact that part of that was doing things or seeing things with the end in mind only and not anything else in between that. And then you give me an example of that about a time you were going to visit a friend during a snowstorm and you crashed your car into a snowbank, and rather than deal with the problem of your car stuck in a snowbank, you continued on to meet your friend. And that was kind of unusual in a way, but it really was a great example of the end being in mind. And so I was like thinking like, wow, I get that. I really You had a really great way of explaining just that, and I glommed onto that a little bit and thought of an idea about how I could desensitize myself towards other people's opinions of things that I was doing, and that manifested itself in a exercise in which. So I live in Los Angeles, and I live close to some hiking trails, and I like to go early in the morning to get exercise. And in order to get to these trails, I have to drive through a neighborhood. In the Hollywood Hills. That's kind of like mainly, I mean, well, everything in the Hollywood Hills here is really expensive. So it's a lot of very wealthy people. And the neighborhood has probably between 8 and 12 stop signs before you get to the area where you would park. And I thought to myself, well, there's hardly any traffic there early in the morning. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to blatantly just go and run all of these stop signs. Now, I want to put a disclaimer here just to say that I did not do any of this stuff to put anyone in danger. And I went out of my way to make sure that I wasn't actually putting people in danger. So I could see the intersection completely. I could see if people were trying to cross the street on foot or by car. And if a situation came up where that was happening, I did not continue with this experiment. But for the first week or so, I didn't really encounter any of that. And I mean, I wasn't even slowing down. I wasn't even tapping the brakes. I could see from where I was going, and I'm just going at 25 miles an hour right through stop signs. There were a couple times where I saw a car would be coming up, but they would be, not arriving at the stop sign the same time I would. So they would see me go right through it and kind of give a look like, oh my God, like what's going on? And I had to lean into that and enjoy that. And there was one moment that really that I'll never forget. So I'm driving through and I ran a stop sign. There's a guy on the sidewalk walking his dog. And he seemed like so this very wealthy, privileged guy who was like just looking for problems. And he saw me do this. He was on the sidewalk, letting his dog pee on the side of the, like on a signpost. And he wasn't in any way attempting to cross the street, but he saw me do this and he was like, oh my God. And he points to the stop sign and he like throws his hands up in the air. And I turned and I smiled. I could see him and I just waved like he was a neighbor. And I was just saying hello. And he was incensed and I was thrilled.
Hmm. Oh, so
Because
you were thrilled? You weren't bothered by that?
No, because I had been doing this for a few days and I could tell that I was becoming desensitized to this. I knew I wasn't putting him in danger. I knew I
Mhm.
wasn't doing anything where I was going to cause any physical damage to anyone else. There was no reason for me to stop. There was no traffic going through. The end was in mind only. I need to get to the park.
Mhm.
I want to get there as quickly as possible. I don't want to hurt anyone while I do it, but no, these rules, these laws no longer apply to me. And so,
Well, especially early in the morning, I totally get it
yeah.
because there are a few stop signs by where I currently live. And it's
Mhm.
like, for whatever reason, sure, in the morning, there's like bicyclists, there's the drivers, there are pedestrians, there's a construction site going on. Like those stop signs are necessary. And then at night, it's just like there's
Yeah.
nobody. I don't know why there's nobody, and it's super well lit, and it's like a T intersection. And so if I'm going like the long way of the T or whatever, I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna gas it through there, but I just coast or whatever. But no, I get it. Like where we put stop signs, etc., is like a little bit arbitrary, and stop signs, unlike stop lights, for instance, are not intelligent. And they don't respond to, I remember, especially traveling in like certain areas of the country, like a lot of these stoplights, like in kind of farm country, often the ones that are hanging, they don't have like a metal thing, they're just hanging from cables.
Yeah.
But they switch from like being like green and like alternating green red like normal or whatever, to it's just green at night in the direction that's the most common, and then the other people get flashing yellow. So it's
Right.
like people can just like, so that's intelligent, right? Because you're like, at night there's nobody here, and flashing yellow just means like, slow down, and you don't even have to stop, but if you can see that nobody's coming, then go ahead. So then it becomes a free-for-all intersection, right? And so it's just, but I wonder how many people listening to this are triggered. Not in a bad way, but because I always feel like if you're triggered, that just kind of like tells you a little bit something about you. That's the great thing about emotional reactions, I've learned,
Mhm.
as I've learned to recognize
Uh-huh.
and embrace my own emotional reactions, is that they tell you something about you. They tell you about your beliefs, your values, your whatever else. So the guy who's yelling at you, like his values are probably, I don't know, like, we can't live in a lawless society. Everybody has to have rules. And it kind of reminds me, I have a friend who I was talking to recently, and we're doing this project, right? And it's just like this short-term holiday project. And he was kind of talking about somebody that we've done things with before and wasn't going to be part of this project because my friend said that he, like, excuse kind of the crude language. This is just quoting my friend. He's like, sometimes my friend said that sometimes you have to suck dick in this life. And the other person who he had kind of intentionally excluded wasn't willing enough to suck dick.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I thought, okay, this is a really interesting kind of belief. But you can now, after he said that, I can kind of see better some of his emotional reactions where he's gotten angry at other people for not sucking enough dick. Like, oh no, we all have to suck dick. And I'm sucking enough dick as it is. And if I have to suck dick, then you have to suck dick. And we're all sucking dick. And I'm like, okay, like just like the beliefs and just like what, so you can kind of imagine uh and totally non-PC way to
Uh-huh.
frame it though, but kind of like maybe this person feels like they've been a beta, like quite a bit of their life, and had to kind of just take things as they came and really wasn't able to kind of assert themselves or to kind of feel like they could ever have it their way or something. And then if you kind of get in a situation where you experience that often enough, then I could see how you'd start wanting to enforce that on other people and being like, oh, if I have to kind of take it as much as I do, then you should have to take it too. So we're not even going to try to resolve this problem, or I'm not even going to kind of use my, rational mind and think, hey, there was no danger in this intersection
Yeah.
incident. And
Uh-huh.
instead, I'm just going to be like, it's this person's cheating. It's
Uh-huh.
unfair. Like, if I have to kind of like take it, then they have to take it too.
Uh-huh.
I think that that's kind of an interesting response that I have at least seen in other people. And in fact, I was part of I've been part of like all sorts of musical groups, right? And I was the leader of this one particular musical group. And it was interesting because this was kind of like a lot of people had cycled in and out of this musical group. And for whatever reason, there had kind of come like this hazing attitude over the years, in which, like, I was new to it, right? But but I was in a position of authority for whatever reason. But the older, like more experienced members of this group would haze the younger ones, right? And then those older ones left kind of right at the same time, or more experienced people left right at the same time that I came in. And so the people who had been hazed were like, okay, it's our turn to haze the newbies, right? And I was like, no, we're not hazing people. And they were like, yeah, we got hazed, and so we should be able to haze. And I thought, wow, this is such a weird thing. Like, my girlfriend Aria said something this morning. She said something about like, be careful for chicken feelings.
Chicken feelings.
Yeah, chicken feelings are feelings that chicken people have that are especially chickeny. And chicken people, the attitude of chicken people is like when you're getting on the plane and everybody's like, "Well, I hope this bag will fit," or like taking so long, or like, "I'm sorry, is this your row or what?" Like just kind of so anxiously going about life in like this weird way of like concern for things that are not a concern, and just kind of slowing up the process. Or like another good chicken kind of behavior is like parking lots during Christmas time, when everybody's kind of like gets weirdly like scarcity mindset, is like a good kind of way to replace chicken feelings, where you kind of feel like your needs are not going to get met, and so you start acting in an anxious way.
Oh yeah.
An anxious way that's kind of defensive, and that's kind of like you're just kind of making a big deal out of nothing. Like there probably isn't going to be, like the problem that you're predicting. Your bag's going to fit, or they can check it, you know. Like
Right.
if somebody's sitting in the wrong seat, they can move. There's not going to the people kind of get like when they're out of their element or something new that they kind of can't predict, then they start thinking about the worst. And because they start thinking about the worst and becoming kind of defensive and kind of grabby, then they actually make the problem that they're worried about. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like they make the problem by being like extra kind of grabby about the overhead bin space, or they make the problem by being like extra aggressive when they're trying to park their car in a mall parking lot during a holiday, weekend or something. Is because they're the ones who, have you noticed that before? And I think they've done studies about this. People who are not in driving cultures, I'll explain this. So like, parking spaces, often a parking lot just has plenty of free spaces. You can take them. But if it gets full, then you have to wait for people to leave. And if people know that somebody's waiting on them to leave, they take like
Oh
500%
yeah.
longer
Right, right,
to
right, right,
leave.
right.
Like they're taking their time, they're taking a sip of water. Like,
Yep.
when normally you get into the car and you just like throw it into reverse or whatever,
Mhm.
and just pop out of there and get out. But like kind of when, or like sometimes in traffic situations, people, they're worried that they're in the wrong lane, so they keep changing lanes. And in them changing lanes, they're creating traffic. They're creating the traffic problem that they're trying to avoid. Do you kind of understand what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. And as far as the chicken feelings, I feel like I'm embarrassed to say, but I think I have been for sure. I think I'm trying to become a reformed chicken, and
Mm,
which is
mhm.
why I'm reaching out, which is why I reached out to you. And I can absolutely identify with all of that stuff of being at the airport and having all these feelings of anxiety regarding whether or not, someone's going to take my seat, or if there's going to be enough overhead, all kinds of things that I really can't control. So
Right.
I get anxious about it, and somehow that energy gets out into the world and
Mhm.
kind of works against me. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And kind of collectively, like that's how the problem gets made, is everybody has this scarcity mindset that suddenly leads. I mean, this is kind of what led to, people said, hoarding during the
Mhm.
pandemic. Now,
Mhm.
this is true. When I was at Costco one time, like during the pandemic, first few months or something of like lockdown or whatever's, I was shopping for multiple people. And so I had like two things of toilet paper in my cart, and I'd left the cart for like just a minute to go like around the aisle to get something else. And when I came back, somebody had taken
Oh, oh wow.
one of the
Yeah.
toilet papers out of my cart. But I was like, oh. Okay, sure. I'll just split the remaining one between the families or something. Like there still was like plenty or whatever. But this idea of kind of needing to hoard things, let's go on this tangent for this is a good topic, I guess. Are you okay with this topic for the next little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this because I read this tweet thread that the who is the person that's tweeting? Let's look. Oh, whoops. It just got off it for a second. So the whole point of this tweet thread is that this person is talking about do you know the game Diablo 2?
Is that a video game?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I don't
You
know. I mean, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've kind of heard of it too. Yeah, I've never played it. So this
Yeah.
person's talking about uh I'll just read you what they say. And so this is the Twitter handle Visa, VISA Conv, or I'm sorry, KANV. So VISAKANV.
Hmm.
And it says Visa's vapid vicissitudes. So it starts off with this guy Visa, I'm assuming guy, says it's weird what changes your life sometimes. In 2018, I watched some guy, Mr. Llama SC, do Diablo 2 speedruns, and it changed my life. It wasn't a super dramatic change overnight, but it shifted something in me about what it means to do things. The whole thread is really interesting, but the one that's kind of applicable to what we were just talking about is that resources are for spending, kind of spend them. Like this idea of being in the scarcity mindset and saving stuff. So he
Hmm.
says that he would finish Diablo 2 run, play the game from top to bottom and end up with about $40,000 gold, just still just sitting in his whatever pocket or whatever. And he
Hmm.
says maybe $20,000 gold, lowest, 60,000 highest. I can't remember, but let's assume on average 40,000. And then says a greater health potion costs about 250 gold. That's 160 health potions I could have bought, but didn't. That's 160 health potions worth of health I could have afforded to lose while fighting mobs that I didn't. So I have this huge safety buffer that I didn't realize I have, and I don't know what to do with. Right. So just kind of this idea of like, I don't know, like I often think that we overestimate the need to kind of save for a rainy day, whatever it is, energy, time, etc. I remember this kind of distinctly in high school. I would come up with these like kind of big musical numbers or whatever as like kind of featured like solo type things. And I remember having an idea to do something like my junior year and being like, oh, but I'll just save it until my senior year. That's like a bigger, better number. And then I thought, I'll just do it now. And then I'll come up with a new idea next year.
Hmm.
Right. And then the following year I had like a different music director who like we came to such a head, like I was trying to get him fired, that I
Oh my
didn't end up doing a solo at all.
God.
So I was like really glad that I just did it when I could, and just the first opportunity that I could, and just didn't kind of save things weirdly, save it for later, and I've done that too with clothing where I'm like, I love this shirt so much, it pairs so well with like suits and but also pairs well with this or something, it just has like a good neckline, whatever the thing is. And so I'll be like, so I'll never wear it because I want to save this. And then like 8 years later, it's out of style or whatever, and I'm like, "Well, I'm not gonna wear this ever," but I kinda wish that I had just worn it when I thought it was so great. Why was I wearing second-tier clothing in an effort to preserve this first-tier clothing, like, because the pandemic happened and I just ended up in my pajamas every day, and just, like, styles changed or whatever. It's just I think we often think that we're doing like a smart thing by not just taking the risk or not taking the chance or like uh what is the way that he put it? Resources are for spending, spend them, your time, your energy, your love, your whatever else, like just go ahead and like say yes to these things. And it reminds me, I went to a music festival in San Francisco back in September. and I was like invited to go like a few days before, and I had like a client who was like, "Hey, do you want these VIP tickets?" And I was like, "Sure," even though I don't listen to this type of music that often. And then I roll up at the hotel, and the hotel person's like, "Oh, what are you here for?" And I said, "This music festival, but I don't really know any of the groups or musicians or anything." And my friend just asked like a couple days ago, "Do you want to come?" So I was like, "Sure, I'll fly up and I'll go see this music festival." And the person was like, "You seem like a yes person." And I was like, "Yeah, I think I am, but I haven't always been." And that's like, it is like a very psychopathic trait, I think, to kind of say yes and like, let's just try it and see, and let's use these resources, and let's not necessarily worry so much about tomorrow that we end up robbing today, really. But there was a time when I got kind of like, so I think into optimizing things, almost like Excel spreadsheet, that I stopped being a yes person and I was more like a let's optimize, let's, like run it through like several calculations before we say yes anymore. And then kind of like I noticed a difference in my life, stretching my legs. I noticed a difference where I just seemed to be retreating from life like quite a bit, and I didn't like the effect that it was having. Like I really did seem like I had like a less enriching life than I did before, a less kind of thick life, robust life, like I just wasn't kind of getting the same results. And then I had like this epiphany about like you have to be planting seeds. Like there's no such thing as just stasis in life. I have a friend who is kind of older and says, I have everything just where I want it, and so I'm not going to change anything. And he like daily runs into frustrations because the truth is that life is always changing.
Mhm.
You are always changing. Like things don't stay the same or something. But this kind of chicken attitude of wanting to be able to predict and control, that's really what it is. Is like you want to be able to predict and control and be comfortable and have kind of like this comfort that you associate with predictability and control. But that is not a thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
You can't predict and control.
I really love the description of it being a chicken thing because um, I mean, for me to make changes of that style and to lean into not being afraid, one of the things that works best for me is to roast the parts of myself that I'm trying to get rid of, and to call it out as a chicken thing, which which is interesting. And you mentioned something that there was a point in time in which you were not a yes person, or you went from being a yes person to a no person. How did that come about, considering that you just also mentioned, and I agree with you, that being a yes person or saying yes a lot is a trait of a psychopath or a sociopath.
Mhm.
So what was it that changed you from yes to spreadsheets?
Yeah. So neuroticism is like a trait that I think especially kind of maybe more high functioning psychopaths experience eventually, because you have so many kind of failures and just like crazy blow ups during like the playground stage
Hmm.
that you start being like, wow, my life cannot handle that many blowups. I can't lose that many friends. I can't have like everybody in town think this bad thing about me.
Right.
I can't be like ostracized from my profession again. I can't, like, can't keep having that happen. So you start getting a little bit more kind of focused about controlling things, just like chicken people do, like psychopaths can also be chickeny about this, where you're like mostly obsessed with controlling and predicting outcomes. And so you like live in this world that's really like, because the truth is this, like this and I'll come back and kind of explain a little bit more. But the truth is you there's only so much that you can predict. And by that I mean it's not like 95%, it's not like 90%. It's closer to like 5%, 10%, 15% that you can predict. And different situations are different, right? You can predict a little bit better driving through that neighborhood that you always drive through in the morning, and where you don't stop at the stop signs anymore, than I can, because that's a drive that you do all the time. And that wouldn't be a drive that I do all the time. So I might just be like, I will stop at these stop signs, but they're like areas that I routinely jaywalk in that other people might not feel comfortable because they're not familiar, right? Or, it's just kind of like, of course, yes, we do predict outcomes. And of course, we do respond to incentives. And that includes disincentives, the idea of getting hit by a car, getting a, stop sign, rolling stop sign ticket or whatever. Um, yes, we respond to incentives, but to kind of be like so hyper focused on on predicting things and trying to kind of control things. So you end up with like no more kind of surprises in your life. There's no, like, when you're trying to control your life, a little bit like my friend who's like, I just want my life to be the same. I got it where I want it. You, if you're, if you stop kind of buying the lottery tickets, sure, you save the money from the lottery tickets, but you never get the chance. And it's that is another thing that this guy said in this Twitter thread is kind of saying try to capitalize off of these chance but really high value interactions. And I think what this person's trying to say is that in life we have certain things, that good things that have happened to you. Like, for instance, I've talked about this recently before, is that I started playing like professionally in like very high quality like venues,
Mhm.
and like much more frequently than I have in my life, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. I
Mhm.
got like the first kind of connection and gig, and then that's led to other things, right? And that's how it always happens, right? You get like one break or one connection here, and then that leads to something else. So yeah, the tweet says farm the good stuff is kind of tricky to translate to a non-gamer, but basically you can benefit from rare events by being deliberate about seeking them out. Like, you can make conversations with people happen more by doing cold emails, asking people out, increasing the number rate. So he kind of says with the gaming, here's the story behind that. There are other things he does that's really smart. He knows, for example, that the Countess in the tower in Act One reliably drops runes. So he plays that Countess multiple times and collects all the runes he needs to make the rune swords he wants. These would take a long time to get from natural play, but by getting them early, he becomes hideously overpowered relative to what I would assume is possible, and can deal much heavier damage at lower levels than me. So a good example of kind of like the limits of orchestrating, I guess, is the best word for, like
I
trying to
love that.
control.
The
And yeah,
limit
this
of work.
neuroticism,
Yeah.
yeah, is associated with orchestrating. The problem with it is, since you're only looking at like 20% of the world, since you can only predict maybe 20% of the world, you're just limiting yourself so drastically. Like, I've said in recent videos, like, I now live for free at the beach, and that came from being a yes person. It did not come from orchestrating. Like, I could not have orchestrated to this particular result. Like, my life has gotten better from being open to taking a risk and being vulnerable. And I guess that's kind of what the opposite of a chicken person is like a chicken person is afraid to be vulnerable.
Yep.
And that's the main fear. That's
Mhm.
the fear that motivates. That's the chicken feelings.
Yeah.
Is fear. Chicken feeling is always a fear. And in this situation, it's a fear of being vulnerable, a fear of being like subject to the elements, a fear of being, not having enough money when you need it or something. And that's what kind of keeps people, or like a fear of not having better ideas down the road. And so you're going to save those ideas for later. It's like this weird scarcity mindset that it seems reasonable, I think, in the moment, but is actually not based in reality at all. And if you look at people who have had the type of success and lives that you want, they're not like that. They're not living their lives.
Yeah.
So it seems weird that you think that, not you, but like the general you. It seems weird that people think that that's a good thing to do when it's never led to good. It's only led to maybe mediocrity.
You know what? And I'm fine accepting that as a description of me. to be honest with you, because in many situations that is the case. One of my closest friends calls me out on it regularly, of a scarcity mindset.
Mm,
And it's not with me all the time, but absolutely, I'm so glad we're talking about this, and especially the broken down. Like, I keep bringing it up, but what a great way to describe that as a chicken person, chicken feelings, like looking at the world through fear glasses nonstop.
hmm.
And
Yes.
that is I think the reason that was the inspiration for me reaching out to you to begin with, is because I saw within you and your experiences, an inherent and really authentic way of looking at things that did not involve that fear mindset,
Yeah.
honestly. And I was like, I need to learn from someone that just doesn't have that muscle, how to
Yeah.
atrophy
So
that muscle myself, you know?
yes, this is a good segue though to go back to like why was I that way for a while? Like why for several years? And it kind of coincided with I had just become a law professor. And I
Mhm.
think I kind of was like, well, law professor, this is probably going to be a decades long career. Now, spoiler alert, it wasn't.
Uh-huh.
Right? But I was like, I really need to buckle down now. I really need to kind of like clean up my act and whatever. Like I need to like just focus on publishing good scholarship and like I don't need that many people in my life. I just need Chick-fil-A.
That's all anyone needs, really.
Yes, and at the time, fan fiction, gay fan fiction, I was like, this is this is I'm like a machine. And I actually do think that it's good to go through periods in which you are kind of like a machine and
Mhm.
you just kind of like cleanly, purely, try to do output of whatever the thing is that you're trying to do.
Mhm.
I think that's smart. I mean, everybody does that, right? Spring training
Mhm.
or what, everybody who's performing at high levels has to step away from just, like Netflix and chill every night
Yeah. Uh,
and kind of like push themselves. But
is
to
that what you're
live that,
referring to when when you said clean up your act? You mentioned that. Is that what you mean?
I think
Like,
I kind of meant this that like I had been too because during the playground stage you are very much a yes person. You're like, yes, I will do things and things will just work out. And I was just talking to my mom about this, about how like for some reason in college I decided to just not replace my tires. I was like, I'll replace them one by one as they deflate, as they like go out, as they pop.
uh, oh wow.
It yeah, and why? Why? They were clearly bald, they were so in need of replacement, but I was like, I'll just do this, whatever. And I read this other tweet that says when you're old, like you're on average wealthier, but the thing that you lack is time, right? So you should, if you're being kind of smart and rational, you should use your money to save time when you're old. And when you're young, it's the opposite. You have plenty of time and you don't have money. So I guess that kind of explains the tire thing. And if I just kind of knew that about myself, like understood that's why I did it, is because I had extra time and I had no extra money, but I feared myself. And I think this is what leads to the psychopath's neuroticism, is because I couldn't predict myself. I tried to manipulate myself and I was pretty good at it. I was good at it enough to do that, like retreat from life and it's only Chick-fil-A and work. I was good enough to do that but I was like, there were other things where, I'd be like clipping along and then suddenly I'd be like, hold it, what did I just say? What am I doing? I'm suddenly starting this seduction of who? It's like because I'd be impulsive, right? I'd be impulsive and then I would create problems, right? Aria, my girlfriend's therapist says uh, that it lacks empathy for your future self. So when you do something in the moment that seems fine, like you don't replace your tires, but then it's just a problem that you're pushing off on your future self to have to deal with the flat tire
Do you
in
ever
a
feel the
weird situation.
anxiety of that? Do you recognize
No,
it? Oh, okay.
so at
Okay.
the time it was completely zero anxiety, and now that seems so weird to me because I've gone from like playground, which is like zero anxiety, to being so neurotic and kind of like feeling like something like that can never happen to me again. Like that's how I felt during the neurotic kind of thing, is like I can't let that happen again. And it was just like a whole list of things that I was like, I can't let this happen again. I can't let this happen again. I can't let this. So it was just constantly kind of trying to like fight off these things that I felt like I couldn't let happen again. And to now where I am now, where it's like things will happen if they happen. I don't control as much as I think that I do. And when I recognize that truth, I have a happier life. I feel less anxiety. I feel less neuroticism, and I get better results actually too. I'm like living a better life than I did when I was like trying so hard to orchestrate everything to be the good life that I thought I wanted. Does that kind of explain it? I guess with psychopaths, yeah, I guess I had a chicken fear, and the fear I had was of myself, that I couldn't control myself as much as I felt like I needed to in order to have the life that I felt like I needed to have. And those were the two fears, the fears that I needed the life to be a particular way, and that I needed, in order to get that life, I needed to be a particular thing and act a particular way to get it.
Hmm.
And that's the neuroticism. That's where the neuroticism comes with the psychopath.
I did not realize there was narcissism associated with psychopathy. Um, Interesting.
Neuroticism or narcissism?
Neuroticism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Older psychopaths start getting it, I think. And part of it too, I have to say, is probably because my brain got worse. So uh I tried to simplify things because when I was young, I could keep stuff in my head a lot better. I was
Mhm.
like, yeah, and I have like this side piece and that thing going on. Like
Mhm.
this
Right.
professional thing, this educational thing.
Mhm.
Like I was able to kind of keep all these plates spinning in like a
Uh-huh.
way that like still worked out. Like I really did feel like I was mostly unfazed by whatever. And then as I got older, the brain got slower, more like more like an old Datsun, whatever, old Pinto.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Right? So it's like cruising around at the speed of could like, the engine could fall out any moment. And then if something kind of any hiccup in that or whatever, then a plate would fall, and
Yeah.
then that would lead to problems or whatever. So I think it is like people say that psychopaths mellow as
Mhm.
they age, and I think it's probably because of that. Is because they run. Do you know anything about computers? Me, not a lot.
A little bit, but not probably about the same amount as you.
Okay,
Uh,
so in this in this analogy, then I just know based on what my brothers have said,
mhm.
and it's that they used to overclock their computers, right? They get a computer and they've always made their own computers or whatever. So they make their own computer out of these component parts that they buy off the internet. And then they'd run the CPU faster than it's supposed to run. So they'd overclock it. And then they'd have to add extra fans and stuff because I guess like, kind of this is
Oh
what
yeah.
yeah, somebody told me this about washing machines that wash clothes, is that you
Mhm.
shouldn't be doing extra large every cycle, that's bad for the washing machine, that it should be like medium or large. Like you should always try to run something in its middle. And it makes sense, right? You try to run a car, for instance, in its middle. You don't always go at its maximum speed or whatever. Like it's bad to kind of push things so hard. But they would overclock intentionally the computers. And I feel like that I did that with my brain. I overclocked it
Mhm.
and it ran super hot all the time. And then because it was running so hot all the time trying to calculate all these things, like if any little stressor or any little bump in the road came along, then it would just like it was already at its max capacity. And so it would just kind of bump. And so yeah, that's why I guess I was able to do that because I also wasn't feeling my feelings. So I was able to think about a lot of stuff that most people don't. But then, especially when I started having feelings more, then I was like, this is way too much. I can't live like this way. And so it really was like a big shift.
uh, that's really interesting. You said some things that I really identified with because I do feel like my brain has always been running on overtime and like always, you know, running at 2000 RPMs even in idle, even when neutral.
Hmm.
And so um but it's mainly it's like clocking all the fears. and trying to figure out
Oh,
like what exactly do I need to do in order to make this more comfortable for myself. And this experiment and learning some things about the way your perception of things are is really helping, honestly, because um, it's helping me to desensitize myself to certain things that, and it's loosening things up. For instance, I mean, like I mentioned, one of the things that I noticed after doing this driving thing is that I started feeling less concerned about people being disagreeing with things that I was
oh,
doing. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, like when I first heard your story in Psychopathy Now regarding the tort of conversion bike drama, I was appalled the same way I think your neighbors were that day. I think now I feel a little differently about it. I still find it unusual, but the edge is kind of taken off of it. But before I would be cringing at what that interaction would have been like, and now I wish I could have been there to see it. And the
Yes.
reason is, I think I'm not so used to being a little. I'm more like interested in conflict a little bit. I mostly have been a person who said I'm sorry and really deferential, and now I feel like I'm a little desensitized. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny you brought that up. And for people who may not know what you're referencing, I'll just tell the story real quick.
Sure.
So I had a friend in from out of town, like from out of the country, really. And they were used to, this particular friend is used to biking around, you know? So I was like, well, it is actually a beautiful neighborhood to bike around in, but I just have one bike. And I thought, okay, my neighbors, it's like a shared underground garage or whatever. My neighbors have these two bikes. And these neighbors, I parked right next to them, and they had like really, really, I don't know if it's late model. I don't know the definition of late model, but they were really old Civics. They were like, probably like 15 years old, and they had like these matching, really old, like I couldn't even like see those cars on the street anymore. They were like so old, 15, 20, 25-year-old Civics. Maybe they were like, they drove them because they were classic, but it seemed like they were kind of like living a little bit beyond their means. No problem about that. They had like these bikes that probably cost like $80 at Walmart. Right. So I was like, well, let's just like borrow one of these bikes. The bikes had like this thick layer of dust. They clearly hadn't been ridden in like, like months, at least months, right? I thought the chances of them coming, their cars were gone. I thought the chance of them coming home and being like, let's go for a bike ride, were super low. And I think that is accurate. So I don't think I was mistaken. So I was like, oh, we'll just go take one of these bikes during the daytime. I'll fix it up a little bit. Bikes are actually meant to be ridden, like they get bad if they're just kind of stay there getting dusty. So I was like, if anything, it's a net positive that we were riding this bike. We'll fill it with air. So we bring it back and everything's fine. When we got back though, I noticed their cars were there. So I was like, okay, maybe they have noticed the bikes are missing, or maybe it's just one bike and maybe they haven't. And they came to confront me at the front door and were like, hey, we noticed one of our bikes was missing and also your bike was missing. And did you take our bike? And I said, yes. And they were like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think it's funny too, because I wonder, like, for an international audience, maybe this seems like a weirder reaction, because I've heard, like, I had a Brazilian student once who said that Americans are property rights fetishists.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the idea that anyone would touch your personal property though seems to trigger
Mhm.
some Americans for some reason culturally. And we have like these defensive property laws that like allow you to be violent to
Mhm.
people
Yeah.
in defense of property. So maybe that's where they were kind of coming from, this couple, but they were just so shocked. And I was just I was surprised that they were so angry. Like I brought the bike back and what?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I love
Like
that story because it triggered me when I heard it the first time. I was like, "Oh my God, if I was her friend and someone came to I would have been appalled." But now I'm just kind of like in awe in a good way. Like, wow. Like I
yeah.
just thought that was
And
kind of
And
interesting.
she's Scandinavian. I think I told her this is what we're doing. I think she was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Oh
And
wow. Okay.
that's the thing too. Like when you kind of realize that some of your fears and some of your beliefs about things are just like, where did they come from? They like snuck into your life. And that's how I felt when I was like retreating from life a little bit. Like I was so used to kind of being fearless about things that I had gotten these fears without realizing they had snuck into my life, these little fears. Fears that I needed things to go a particular way or otherwise I wouldn't be happy. Fears that, like things wouldn't go a particular way unless I did XYZ and kind of made them happen, like just these different fears and beliefs that I don't even know where they came from. And so that's what I really kind of sympathize with everybody who has ever kind of had chicken feelings is like, you probably don't know where they came from either.
Yeah. That's actually a question I had for you. You mentioned the park incident with your brother when your
Mhm.
parents left you there, and kind of implied a little that that may have been an inciting incident. Do you see that as an inciting incident regarding your psychopathy? Do you remember any initial thoughts? I mean, what do you tell me?
Yeah, that one's kind of funny because I mostly remember that just because of what we did afterwards, which was so like again to kind of tell the story quickly, like we all went for a walk in the park, my parents and I, and then we were kind of walking and went in a different direction. We were on some playground equipment, and then we kind of saw them start getting in the car, so we started walking from the playground equipment to the car. And then they got in the car and they just drove away. And but we were close enough to like run after them, being like,
Hmm.
we're right here, stop. And they just kept driving. And
Uh-huh.
the only reason why I remembered it from at the time is because after that we were like, well, let's just go across the street to where we know our brother's car is parked because he went to the high school across the street. And so we went into the car and he had like gone skiing. And so he had like all this kind of like, like winter wear scarves and like hats and stuff. So we just like got dressed that way and pretended to be like homeless on the street, like begging for money. That's the only reason I remember that story. But it
Uh-huh.
is kind of funny because my girlfriend Aria was like, she said when she was like reading the book, she's like, sure, sure, sure. But when she got to that point, she was like, that was like still the story that stands out most to her. And it's kind of funny, like, to me, that was just a story that was like one of probably like 50 types of things that were very similar. And that was just kind of like that was my world or whatever. And then to her, she just can't even imagine because she has her own kind of like I guess inciting events, as you
Hmm.
put it,
Hmm.
triggering events
Hmm.
that happened to her in childhood, but they're just so different. They're so different. And her, like, she would have never been left at a park like that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
By anybody in her family, right? Anybody who was tasked with taking care of her. And maybe it's too because she's younger and I don't know, that might be like kind of a little bit of a generational difference. But yeah, it is interesting kind of what you just get used to. Like I would say when that happened, I was probably like 10 or something, because I had a brother that was in high school and driving. So I must have been even like a little bit older than that. And so I didn't feel like I don't feel like that kind of triggered things because I think my reaction was the way it was because I had already been triggered, I guess. But I do think it's like a good illustration of like the types of like just kind of the attitude I think my parents had about parenting. Like they were like that when I was like 6 months old, I'm sure. They were like that when I was 2, when I was 6, when I was 8, so that wouldn't have been outside the norm. And I didn't even think of that story as being remarkable until I was just kind of like sitting, kind of just writing all childhood stories I could remember. And then I had like a friend or somebody kind of go through and say, like, these are the ones that seem most interesting.
Mm, I
And
see.
that just, yeah. So it wasn't even something where I thought this is a triggering event. I just thought this is a funny story in which I pretended to be homeless. And then the street sweeper came and was like, where are your parents?
Mhm. Well, I can tell you that reading it, I thought to myself, I wonder if this is an inciting incident, in that, you know, because I don't know if this is where psychopathy is born, is in a person's brain in which they're like, okay, here's a situation these are very uncomfortable feelings. For instance, my parents are leaving me. And so I no longer want to feel those feelings. So I'm going to shut them down, and the brain learns to just shut down uncomfortable feelings. But instead of just specific things, it shuts down an entire section. They're like, we're done over here. We're no longer
Yeah.
going to have, and so that's why I was wondering if that was, but you said no. So,
No, no, no. I
but I mean,
actually, no, I agree with you, but I'm
okay.
just saying that that was too late. Like my brain had already become that way.
I
But
see.
something that was exactly like that would have happened, I guess, when I was young enough,
Mhm.
something like very similar because my parents were still that way. Like that was
Mhm.
like, that's why I mean, like, that was so normal to me that you can just like go back into in time, to when I was like a baby. And I'm
Mhm.
sure there were things that were just like that were happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a triggering event. It just wasn't that, but it was something very similar to that, I'm sure.
Okay.
And multiple ones, I'm sure.
And then you mentioned I don't remember if it was on one of these podcasts or something else that you used the term that you felt like you were in recovery from manipulation.
Oh yeah.
And and so you mentioned, yeah, you were in recovery from that. And I was just curious, like, what specific actions do you feel like you take, or on a regular basis, to stay in a state of what you refer to as recovery? Or
Yeah,
does that
it's
make any sense,
interesting.
my question?
Yeah, no, 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 totally makes sense because, and it kind of ties into what we talked about at the beginning, is that one
Mhm.
thing that a psychopath, I think, tends to do, not maybe every single one, but it just tends, it's kind of like saying autistic people tend to like trains, you know? This kind of the brain like lends itself a little bit more to, liking trains, so this is one of these examples. I think psychopaths tend to be focused on the outcome. I think they're very sensitive to rewards. And I think their behavior can be easily influenced by an incentive structure that rewards certain behavior, certain actions over others. So one way to kind of say this is that they're very outcome oriented, they're very
Mhm.
reward oriented. And you gave a story about that I gave during the part one about how I was like so focused on getting to my friend's house that I, like drove my car into a snowdrift and
Mhm.
then was like, got picked up by the cops and they were like, you'll have to stay at this hotel overnight. And I was like, no, just like flag down a trucker and
Oh
hitchhike
my
with this person.
oh my God.
And just kind of so focused on the outcome of like just, I'm not going to spend like some random night in nowhere town,
Mhm.
right? I'm just going to get to my friends. Like there's like some activity or something that we're going to do the next day or whatever. There's something that I wanted to do, right? And so I just kind of didn't let anything get in my way. And
Mhm.
maybe that kind of answers your question in a while, in a in a bit about like how that could be kind of manipulative, right? Because if you are just so focused on outcome and the reward of the thing, like the idea that I need to make this particular thing happen, then you very just naturally manipulate yourself and others because you're like, well, what do I have to say in order to get this person to cooperate? Like, what do I have to say to the cop in order to just let me out?
Mhm.
What do I have to say to the truck driver in order to stop and like pick me up, And so you need people's compliance or complicity, I
Mhm.
think, in a lot of these situations, and just kind of like what needs to be said in order for this to whatever. And I
Mhm.
think that if you live in that outcome orientation, the kind of the opposite of this is process orientation, where you're not thinking, hey, I have to get, I don't know, let's say like I have to make $1 million by the age of 30. Let's say that's kind of like an outcome orientation. A process orientation would be, I'm going to live like the happiest life and maximize my joy every moment as much as I can. That's nice. That's nice, right? But a
Yeah.
psychopath can't, because what does it mean to kind of live every moment? Like if you kind of dig down deep, I this is my, at least my own personal experience, my own personal belief, is like, in order for you to be able to be process oriented, you have to be yourself, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And if you have a personality disorder, you have some degree of confusion about what it means to be yourself. That's what a personality disorder is, right? You have
Uh-huh.
some identity wrong beliefs or confusion or lack of knowledge. And I think for psychopaths, the way it manifests itself largely is you just have like lack of knowledge. You don't have like a strong sense of self. You don't have a strong understanding of who you are. You know,
Mhm.
like you can see the way that you act, you can see, certain physical characteristics about yourself, certain maybe even mental characteristics that you've observed, like a scientist.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And said, okay, I know that I, for instance, in these situations react this way. But if you're still outcome oriented, then you just take that information and be like, so therefore I need to manipulate myself.
Mhm.
Like if I'm reluctant to go to the gym, for instance,
Uh-huh.
when it's like XYZ, then I need to just remove XYZ so I can manipulate myself into going to the gym. Now, a lot of like self manipulation is good, right? We do like a lot of like little tricks to help ourselves remember things. Like I put things in my reminders. I maybe have bragged about this before, but I'm up to 60 push-ups daily.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, it's because I just started with 10. And then
Uh-huh.
I just kept
Right.
adding 5 as I would get stronger or whatever. But I wouldn't be able to do that except for my phone, which reminds me every day to
Uh,
do push-ups,
right.
right? And I think it still says do 10 push-ups. Yeah, do 10 push-ups. When really it's 60 now, but it's been that reminder for the past like 2 years. And so like yes, we do manipulate ourselves. Yes, that is part of life. Yes, we sometimes manipulate others, even like with dentists, try to calm us down right before a dental procedure. I think everybody probably consents to that.
Uh-huh.
Like we take medication to manipulate ourselves, to like up this or down this, or we take recreational drugs to manipulate ourselves. We're constantly doing this. But the difference between uh somebody who's not personality disordered, let's say, and not like psychopathic or psychopath adjacent, and somebody who is psychopathic, is if somebody says like, stop manipulating, stop kind of orchestrating, just be yourself. The psychopath does not know how to do that. They have to at least take several years of therapy, probably in a process of learning how to do that. It's not like they can stop because they don't know how to be themselves. They've never learned that.
Hmm.
So I guess for me, the recovery of manipulation is just to be process oriented. And when I kind of find myself being like a little bit overly fixated on an outcome, then I will back off and kind of switch to process. So it's kind of funny that
Uh-huh.
that the advice I gave you last time was to be more outcome oriented, but I can
Mhm.
kind of see why I would. But for me, I can't. I can't be outcome oriented anymore because it would be like, like no, I've never been alcoholic, but it might be like an alcoholic showing up, for like a bartender job position or something. Like it's just like, no, this is like a little bit too fraught or
Uh-huh.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
And
sure I am outcome oriented sometimes, obviously. Like, I drove today, that I had to be outcome oriented about that. I ate today. Why? Probably, to so I would stop having hunger pangs.
yeah. Well, I think where it works for me on a level of curtailing some of my more out of control neurotic elements is
Mhm.
that, I'm less concerned about things I don't need to be concerned about. Like,
Yeah.
um, just me rubbing someone the wrong way. And it has you know, come into my regular everyday life. I mean, recently I was on a flight across country, and there was somebody that he was obnoxious going through security. He was kind of pushing his way past people and doing whatever. And normally I would just kind of let something like that go. and we were both
Hmm.
going through, he had gone through the actual security zone and maybe had a belt on or had some change in his pocket and had to come back out through. And at that moment, when he was putting his stuff through the X-ray machine again, it was my turn to go through the thing. And he went to cut right in front of me. And normally I would have been just like, whatever. And instead I said, I said, excuse me. He goes, oh, I was just here. And I said, yeah, I don't care. And
You
that,
said that?
yeah, I said, I don't care. And he
uh,
looked at me, he was shocked. And I felt so good. It's the same way I felt when I was waving to
hmm.
the guy in the street I was like, wow, no, I need to do this more often. And not
Yeah.
that I'm trying to be more of a jerk or I'm trying to be more of a, self-centered individual. But I need more of that in my life for sure.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and but weirdly, I am identifying with a lot of the things that you're saying here. I don't remember what is the psychopathy test. I took that actually.
So I
The
actually think the most reliable one is the
Yeah,
MMPI. Yeah, the Minnesota
MMPI.
something personality inventory. Now, some people call this the gold standard, but ask yourself who started calling it the gold standard. It seems like it was the author of this was Robert Hare's TCLR, so the
Yes,
psychopathy
PCLR.
checklist revised. Yeah, or the
Yes.
screening version. Yeah. So yeah, that we'll just say yes, that is currently in use.
PCLR, are you saying that is accurate or inaccurate?
Well, it was based on a population of Canadian prisoners,
Yeah.
male prisoners. So,
Uh-huh.
like, ask yourself if there's any sampling bias there.
Obviously, yeah. Yeah. Well, the weird thing was I took the test. I was as honest as I possibly could, and I didn't score anywhere near where I thought I was going to.
Oh, you thought you were going to score higher?
No, I just thought I was going to score lower. And
Oh,
so for instance, there are numbers. Yeah, there are numbers. So I guess 40 is you're pegged, 35. So in England, apparently, if you score 35, you're considered or no, wait. In England, if you score 30, you're considered a psychopath. In America, 35, you're considered a psychopath. 40,
mm.
basically, you're probably dangerous. And you know, I was in the high 20s.
Oh, really?
I was
That's
surprised.
really high.
I was in the mid 20s, actually. I
That's
was
quite
like,
high. Yeah, but you scored it yourself?
well, yeah, I mean, it was something
Mm,
online or something along those lines.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was surprised, but at the same time, I was like, okay, so there's other areas of my life where I feel like I am outcome oriented, and there's other ones where I'm really not. There's very specific instances where I'm really concerned about other people's opinions of me, and then places where I'm not at all. But
Yeah.
anyway.
I mean, I can see how we evolved to be concerned. And this is kind of like what we talked about in part one is like, why are psychopaths so good about not caring about what other people think about them? And I don't remember if I answered this, but I'll answer it again real quickly here. It's just because if you have no sense of self, then you have no real connection to your identity. And so like you just don't care. You don't care because it's not a thing. It's like
Right.
not caring, I guess, about a child that's yours that you don't realize you have, you know? Like you don't even realize you have it. So it's
Mhm.
just totally off your radar, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind of like the nice thing. But like the other good thing about it is like people who live in chicken fear,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, like to try to impose that chicken fear on other people. It's kind of what we said about my friend who's like, everybody has to suck dick or whatever, is
Mhm.
like, no, why? Like, this doesn't make sense. And what do you mean by this? Like, I don't even know what you mean by this.
Mhm.
But it's like, if I don't know, the fear or something. So I'm really proud of you asserting yourself at the airport,
Mhm.
because I think, like, there is this study that says this. Here's what they tested. Like, if somebody goes to cut in line, will somebody allow them to cut in line? And they studied different things, so somebody comes up and says, "Hey, can I cut in line?" That is more likely to be, I forget now, maybe if they do it without saying anything, then people are afraid of like confronting them. But if they ask,
Mhm.
then people are like less afraid, they can say no. But if they give any reason at all, even if they just say, repeat that they have to cut in line, like, hey, can I cut in line because I need to cut in line? If they give
Uh-huh.
any reason at all, then there's like 86% of people or whatever are like, sure, cut in line.
Right, right. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you've given any reason at all. But I think people do exploit that.
Mhm.
Probably this guy who like doesn't seem to understand, that there are other people in the world, and it's just kind of used to being like, well, I need to go through the security, and it's like, well, duh. What do you think is this line of people? What are we all doing, going through security? But for something like that, I think that the real answer about whether or not to say or do something, like should you assert, because you said, like normally you would just allow it to happen, but like the thing that I would really kind of think is like the more interesting part about that story is like why would you choose either way? Because if I'm in a situation now that I've become like much more a yes person, in my old decrepit sociopath brain years, is
Uh-huh.
and had to kind of like like come up with different kind of accommodations to my psychopath brain, like it being old and bad now, and but it's still being kind of psychopathic, but like have, like it's a weird blend, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But like one thing that I do now, as kind of a rule, is if I'm afraid of something, then I do it. And this I learned actually from one of my high school friends who was kind of like this gangly guy, like should have been kind of considered a nerd, but was like actually really outgoing, and even considered kind of a little bit outrageous, in like a fun loving way, like class clowny in high school. Is That's what he said. He said, he just decided to, if he was ever afraid of something, to just do it because he'd rather not live with fear, that much fear in his life. I guess he had like lived that way and he just decided he didn't want it. And it's crazy how much of a shift that makes, because we avoid the fear, but the fear kind of
Mhm.
controls us when we avoid it, right?
Right.
And so if I were in that situation and he's about to cut in front of me, I guess what I would ask before I kind of did, chose, is do I fear the confrontation?
Uh-huh.
Or do I fear the inconvenience? Like, do I fear anything? And if I'm fearing it, if I fear the confrontation, then I do confront him. And if I
Mhm.
don't fear the confrontation, then maybe I just let him go, because I'm like, I don't have to be the one who polices him. And honestly, I don't kind of care or whatever. Like, if there's no fear there, then I would just be like, that's a neutral choice, I
Right.
guess. But
Mhm.
if I sense that there was chicken fear in me about something, then that's usually like a sign for me, at least personally, where it's like confront this immediately. Because if you let chicken fear kind of continue, then it will start affecting like every aspect of your life in a negative way.
Yeah. And I think that was what I felt like, oh shit, this is going to be a conflict.
Mm,
Oh, I don't want to do it. Oh no, you have to. And I
yes.
immediately thought of stop signs.
Yeah.
I
For
thought
you.
of stop signs. I thought of you. And I was like, no, you have to say something. And he's like, I just have to go again. I was like, I don't care. And I just looked at him straight in the and he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. And he backed off and I just went through. And it was like such a non thing, but to me it was kind of a big deal. It was kind of a
Yes.
big deal.
I'm so proud of you. That's yeah. So you knew that you were like, oh, fear of the conflict, but then you were like, because of that, stop signs. I love this. I love this so much
Yeah.
for you. Yeah.
Well,
Well,
you
because
inspired it.
awesome. Well,
Yeah.
the thing that I think is the worst, this is why chicken fear is so toxic, is because chicken fear, uh and this is kind of become a theme, I guess, of like at least maybe the last like 6 to 8 episodes, as I kind of come to this realization. Chicken fear uh distorts who we are. It distorts our actions, and we're basically saying, I'm not going to be my authentic self in this
Mhm.
moment in order to get a smoother outcome, a more comfortable outcome. So we're saying, I'm willing to mutilate myself. I'm willing to not be true to myself.
Wow.
I prefer doing that. I prefer kind of like, hurting myself,
Graduate.
mutilating it, like distorting, like being less than who I am in this moment in order, in exchange for something. You're commodifying yourself. You're like exchanging part of you for like comfort, for some like temporary comfort. And I think that's really the thing that's so bad about it, is because like in order to, in my own opinion, and probably a lot of people agree that that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing to mutilate yourself,
Mhm.
especially on the regular. And you can see how, like, kind of doing it over and over again, you're hurting yourself, as my friend said, sucking dick, right? And then you start to resent the world and the people around you because you feel like they're forcing you to make those choices. You feel like they're forcing you to hurt yourself, to like, like self-inflict these pains on yourself in order to get this particular result. Then you start becoming kind of calloused to these people. You start being like, so I can hurt them back. Like they made me hurt myself. Now I can hurt them back. You can kind of see how this like spirals pretty quickly into
Yeah.
like, because this is why Arya said this morning, she was like, there's nothing scarier than chicken feelings.
Nothing
Is
scarier.
because they eventually will like go, they just feel so put upon or whatever, like they snap. Everybody will snap if you just kind of keep doing that for long enough. And that's why I think that's probably the best reason to know why, that there's true damage happening there when you're mutilating yourself that regularly, is that it's totally unsustainable. You eventually will snap and then you'll do, who knows what.
That is such a powerful way to articulate that, and kind of a real good instigator for change, because the term mutilate just is very visceral, and when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, I need to tell myself that on a regular basis. I'm willing to mutilate myself to make someone else feel more comfortable. I can't
Yeah.
do that. I cannot mutilate myself to make someone else comfortable. Not willing to do that.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Self mutilation. Like, why would you? Like, we think of like female genital mutilation and we're like, terrible, would never happen. And yet, like, what self mutilation do we get up to on the daily? That's why I say, in some instances, like, that's why you have to kind of be aware and ask yourself this question. Because if I was in the situation that you were in and I felt totally fine about letting the guy go in front of me in line for whatever reason, it's not self mutilation. It's only self mutilation when I am like distorting my own behavior self out of fear in order to get this outcome, this desired outcome. Like, it's only when I'm like using myself as currency in the world,
Mhm.
trading parts of myself in order to get what I think is ahead in this
Yeah.
particular situation. That's if I felt like that's why I was doing it, that was my motivation, then I'd be like, no, you can't do that. Don't let that person in front of you.
Right. Mm.
But I have a couple. These are things that I've been thinking about more from this tweet thread.
Mhm.
So you had said about outcome orientation, and I do think this is like, outcome orientation is great. And remember when I said like I do think some people, you should live like a monk or like a Spartan here and there and just focus on outcomes sometimes. So
Mhm.
this is about he says you don't have to do everything. You can actually focus on the most valuable, important things and generally disregard the rest. Might take some trial and error to figure out how, but it's worth trialing. So this is what he's talking about. This person who's doing the speed run of Diablo. He
Uh-huh.
says, he's like, at first it kind of seemed like, oh, he's doing the same thing. You encounter, you gain experience, you have to level up. And then he says, but this is where things get more interesting. He knows that you get much more experience from mini boss characters and their minions. So he focuses his time and energy almost exclusively on killing those while running away and around non-boss mobs. So he kind of doesn't, he's kind of saying like he selectively chooses, I guess, his battles in a way that it's like if you assert yourself all the time, maybe there's some value there, but it kind of
Mhm.
treats every situation the same, and every situation is not the same. Like, you really can get like more bang from your buck out of certain things. And I don't find it to be like this. I found to be kind of a revelatory epiphany, maybe like 9 months ago, 12 months ago. I would get like it kind of in these Twitter battles. They kind of feel like, yeah, like I was getting like sucked into them and becoming kind of emotionally involved in them and whatever. Somebody would say something outrageous or whatever, and I'd be like, all right, time to boss some people up, you know. That was like my attitude about it. And then I was following, I think I've mentioned her before, Nedra Tawwab, who has like a book about, I think it's called Find Boundaries, Find Peace. I haven't read the book, but I follow her on Instagram, and she seems like a very light person, like very right way kind of thinking. And maybe this would be a good book for you too, because it, you know, like this idea of boundaries, you know, and not allowing people to force you to mutilate yourself. They're very much the same concept, right? Personal boundaries. So
what was her name again?
Nedra, Nedra Tawwab. It has two W's. Tawwab.
Okay.
Yeah. She's on Instagram. I mean, she's like very right way person. Like I it's rare. And she kind of is like counter kind of the general cultural movement in ways I think that will sometimes surprise people, but in ways that I agree with her. I'm like, no, that is correct. You know, just because this, you still like assert your boundary this way or something. So I think she's not like kind of one of these people that I think is just kind of like spewing, not spewing, you know, just like kind of rehashing tired tropes or whatever. Like I really think
Mhm.
there's like a lot of internal consistency and integrity to
Right.
the way she conceives of this that is very seems very truthful to me. But she kind of talked about like, why are you spending your energy? Like, be careful where you spend your energy. Why are you spending it on things that don't matter with people that don't matter? And so then I thought, you know, with this idea with the Twitter like debates I'm getting in, like, how angry am I getting?
Uh-huh.
How frustrated, how much time am I spending with these people? And yes, it does kind of suck to see something, you know, completely like dark or completely kind of spiteful or something that's completely just wrong, you know, like on the internet, and just kind of be like, okay, you know, I just choose not to spend my time doing that. But you have to, you have like limited energy, you have limited time, you have limited attention. And so just kind of this idea that that this particular tweet has, where it's like you don't have to do everything.
Uh-huh.
You can actually focus on the most valuable important things and generally disregard the rest. And actually Marcus Aurelius too has a great quote that I'll paraphrase, where he says, you don't have to have an opinion about everything. You know, like you don't have to kind of let your external circumstances essentially dictate the way that you spend your time and attention. Like just because somebody's tweeted that doesn't mean you have to be involved. Like their decision to tweet that is totally separate from your tweet decision to respond. You know, you can
Uh-huh.
just let it be, you know, like you don't have to. I think people sometimes are like, I can't let that stand. But
Uh-huh.
stand what? What does it mean? Let it stand. Like, what are you trying to do, or whatever, right? So I think too, sometimes when people are bad with boundaries about certain things, they'll get really aggressive with boundaries about other things. Like I, you know, like get in these really bad Twitter fights or something, or like, you know, really assertive about certain aspects of their life, almost because they're under assertive or like kind of don't know how to like assert themselves or stop mutilating themselves in another area. So I think that's really important. Is as like it's not like there's this big just general rule that's like assert yourself all the time, you know, or never compromise. It's not that, you know, like it's a very nuanced thing where you have to really understand like what is like most important to you, and to be true to that rather than trying to be true to what other people think should be most important to you, I
Right.
guess. So there was another one too. Oh, this one I liked. The thing you avoid, maybe you don't have to avoid it. What a great statement. Maybe you don't have to avoid the thing you avoid. This is like investigate your own behavior pattern and ask yourself the reasoning behind each element, and then question the reasoning because maybe it's unnecessary in a different frame. So this idea of kind of like, you know, why did I start retreating from the world? You know, I had those beliefs and I don't even know where those beliefs came from. I never did investigate until, you know, I started to see the negative consequences. I was like, you know, I feel like my life is like really flat and empty, even more than usual, right? And so I thought I have to do something different. So here's what he says about the Diablo guy. He says he buys lots of potions, including stamina potions. Stamina potions stack. I didn't know this, meaning you can drink dozens of them at a time and have effectively infinite stamina. His inventory is practically always full of potions, both health and mana potions, which allows him to constantly be taking damage and constantly be dealing damage. This makes so much sense, and yet I never considered it. Before watching him, I'd have thought it would be a waste of money, but he's basically optimizing for how can I spend as little time as possible getting as much experience as possible. And that means fighting mini boss mobs as much as possible, which in turn means fighting them and taking damage. So this, I think, is kind of like encapsulates a lot of what we've been talking about, is like this guy, this Diablo player, is not worried about taking damage. He does not have a scarcity mindset about that. He does not think that things have to go a particular way in order for things to be good. He's willing to take the chances. And in being willing to take the chances, you have to be willing to take the damage. But it's okay. It's okay, because there's going to be some way that you didn't, you'll figure it out. You'll figure out some way. Or if it is taking too much damage, then you will get that information and be able to like reincorporate that into your ideas and change. Either way, you want to find out right away. If this is going to work, then just try it. If you try it and it doesn't work, then at least you have that information. You'll be able to kind of take that information and like change up your plan or abandon that plan and go to a different plan. But if you never try it, if you just kind of chicken fear about trying a particular thing, then it's like my friend who's like, I want my life to stay the same, but actually his life every year is just diminishing bit by bit because entropy, right? Like in order to stay the same or grow, you have to be constantly taking little risks. And in those little risks, yes, there's the possibility of damage, but there's also the possibility of great productivity, self-expression, sense of meaning, sense of purpose, sense of fulfillment. And so I think that that's the real problem with the chicken fear. Yes, in acting one way in the chicken fear, it mutilates ourselves, but in making the chicken fear kind of our master, we also rob ourselves of all these potential possibilities that we're just too afraid to try. We're too afraid to try something new for the possibility that it might not go right. And yeah, that possibility exists, but it's still like, it's kind of what he says with the Diablo guy. Like, even though that is true, like you could have problems, like it's still much better to take the risk.
You said something just now that really resonated with me. You said either way, you want to find out right away. You want to find out
Yes.
either way. Doesn't matter, good, bad, doesn't matter, but the answer right away. And I think
Yes.
that's amazing because I mean, when I was growing up, I was in high school. I was on the swim team, and I
Mm.
was a diver. And sometimes we'd learn new dives that were kind of scary. And I do remember because you're worried about hitting the board or landing flat or whatever it is. And so sometimes I remember standing there on the edge of the board or whatever we were going to do, whatever I was going to do, and for forever and just waiting and waiting as if waiting was going to, squash my fear of taking action.
Yeah.
Eventually you just have to take action anyway. So
Yeah.
waiting doesn't do anything. And I think that translates into everything else in my life, quite honestly.
Yes.
Waiting never what's well, you either have the right or wrong answer now or later. Doesn't matter.
Yes. Yeah, when people are like, I don't want to find out how I die or whatever, I'm like, huh.
Uh-huh.
It's like a type of that, or like I don't want to find out if my significant other's cheating on me or something. It's
Mhm.
like just find out, because if you're willing to accept it, then that you kind of have nothing to fear. Like everything is gonna end up being okay. But so I used to think that I'd be like a great family law attorney because I,
Mhm.
I like personal finances and a lot of it deals with that, right?
Mhm.
And I'm so callous or whatever. I thought like people's emotional problems won't tax me
Right,
emotionally
right.
like they would other people. But then I kind of didn't realize that. So I did a two-month stint at a family law firm. I didn't realize though that because they're having so many emotional problems, that they're constantly reaching out to you for like emotional help and validation, and that
Mhm.
wasn't a good fit. But then after I realized I didn't like it, then I just dropped that dream. I was like, oh, I never have to wonder anymore whether I would be like a good family law attorney because I've already tried this. I've already tried this and I can move on. And sometimes I think people fear the death of a dream, but a new dream always comes along. like a new thing always comes along. We don't have to be kind of scarcity mindset about that. There's something else that you said that like triggered us. Oh, about like fear. Like, so this kind of seems stupid maybe, but I'll tell it because it is stupid.
I love stupid.
Yeah, so I didn't major in bass. That wasn't my
Mhm.
primary instrument as a music major, right? And but I get all my gigs, all my bigger gigs as a musician now on bass. But I've
Mhm.
never played because it wasn't my major, my primary instrument. I've never played bass in an orchestra, but I decided, you know what? I will just do this. Am I not doing it because I'm afraid? Right. So I was like, I'm just gonna sign up for a community orchestra and I'm just gonna play in this orchestra. And the first rehearsal, I kid you not, the day of the first rehearsal, I was like so nervous. I was so chicken feelings about it. And I
Uh-huh.
was like, I'm like really worried, will I be able to play or, what are they going to do? Or, will it be terrible or something? And then, afterwards I was just like, that was totally fine. I had nothing to be worried about. Yes, I have some challenges, but I knew that. That's why I'm doing this. I'm trying to get better at this particular thing. And but it just kind of surprised me how nervous, how afraid I was. And then here's like another quick story. So Aria, I don't know why this is a thing. Like was like, we need to like get a gym membership or something, like during the pandemic, kind of let it lapse. And then, was just kind of filling in with like walks and like hikes or whatever. But then thought, like during the winter, it's so hard to do walks or hikes before the sun sets, right? So I was like, let's get a gym membership. So like we went and I always swim. So that's always an easy one, like there's no, and I feel really comfortable in the pool now. Although there was a time too when I was like, are people going to criticize my technique or like I don't know what I'm doing, but
Uh-huh.
then she though she's only kind of used, she's never had a gym membership, she's only used kind of treadmills and stuff, so she was nervous and you could tell that she was like, I mean, there's like 100 different machines, there's cable this, free weight that, there's like this stuff going on, right? You could tell that she was kind of like, is this going to be okay? But then she did do it, right? And afterwards, she's like, "No, I just did the Stairmaster. I did this. I did, And
Mhm.
she's like has an appointment with somebody to like go over like some of the whatever new machines. Now, those are both stupid stories, but you can kind of see how like somebody, if you didn't just choose to act, like because how long has it been that we've been talking about the gym? 6 to 8 weeks or whatever.
Mhm.
And finally, I just was like, I'm making the appointment. But if we probably, honestly, if we left it up to Arya, maybe we'd still have no gym membership, because just like a little bit of friction, and this is like microeconomics, just a little bit of friction in a decision, like something that makes something a little bit more difficult. And definitely chicken feelings do make things more difficult. That's like one trade-off to having feelings. I can say as having pretty much different feelings, hardly any feelings before, is that yeah, it is harder to have feelings and still kind of like get stuff done.
So is
So
this a
make
new
sure you
thing? Is this is a
yeah,
new thing for you then in terms of, because I mean I was surprised to hear that you were nervous, number one, about playing bass in an orchestra, and then if I remember correctly, Aria is also on the spectrum of psychopathy.
yes,
And
yeah.
then so both of it, so you guys be talking about fear. Is that a new muscle that's being worked out? Is
Yes,
Okay,
yes. Uh-huh.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it is kind of terrible. Well, it's interesting too because like the thing, this is why I kind of, I mean, I was sloppy about saying I did have feelings before, I just wasn't connected to them.
Mhm.
Like even Aria had to be, I think, hospitalized when she was like 19 because she had a panic attack that she did not recognize as being a panic attack until she like blacked out or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and then woke up, so you're just so disconnected from your physical, kind of somatic, your feelings
Hmm.
self.
Hmm.
Like you're disconnected from the rest of yourself, but especially those parts, you're disconnected. So as you kind of connect with those things, it's tricky because she said this too. She said that now she hates menstruating because she's like, I get hormonal, like I actually have different feelings. Whereas before she said it was like nothing. And she says even that she it actually lasts longer too. And I was like, I wonder if that's a psychosomatic thing. Is that as she has like embraced her feelings and stuff, like her body's allowed to be vulnerable. I can just go through its whole menstrual cycle or whatever without things. It's just interesting. Like there's so many interesting things that I think are psychosomatic. I used to think this is a totally kind of weird, like TMI embarrassing thing. I used to think that I had like a really small bladder because I was like, I basically need to pee like every hour, and that I would constantly be looking for bathrooms if I was like out and about and constantly, preemptively using them. And then after therapy, though, no. Now I can go like a 8-hour flight and not have used the restroom once or whatever, like it's such a big transition because I used to always be like, I need to have a seat on the aisle in a plane, all these
Uh-huh.
different things. You just wonder, like, it's just such a weird world, psychosomatic. But I think, as we kind of like embrace these things, like, like I would have been probably, I'm sure I was nervous. Let's say I had like a big audition in my early 20s. I'm sure I was nervous. I just did not realize it.
Mhm.
I just
Mhm.
wasn't kind of aware of it. But I'm sure I was nervous because my hands would shake. Like I was aware that my hands would shake. I just did
Oh,
not feel nervous, but I had the physical symptoms. I recognized them as being the physical symptoms of being nervous. So it
I wonder
is
if that's the. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I think I was just going to be repetitive, redundant on that one. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if it's. I wonder if it's similar to what I hear actors here in Hollywood doing, is taking a drug. It's a beta blocker
Oh,
to keep their nerves down. But then also I had a question. And what are the exercises in which you get more in touch, allow yourself to be more feel your feelings more? What exactly is the process of that?
yeah. So, I
So I'd like to
mean,
reverse engineer it.
yes, uh-huh. So if people need to get more in touch with their feelings, that's the funny thing is like psychopaths need to get more in touch with their feelings probably. I mean, everything's a balance, right? And then other people are like their feelings dominate their life probably too much
Right.
is probably a good way to put it. So for me to get more in touch with my feelings, a lot of it's attention. As a psychopath, I feel like my attention's still messed up. Kind of like a little bit like uh ADHD, kind of like where you can hyper focus or like something can be completely off your radar. So that
Mhm.
still is kind of the way my attention tends to be. So I mean, a lot of it is I just kind of like I use my phone to remember the push-ups.
Uh-huh.
Like I just have like these habits that I've built in of like meditation. What was a good one? I used to thought journal. Like if I had if I kind of felt like something was off, then I would like sit down and be like, okay, what do I think? What's happened in the past 3 hours that may have triggered this kind of feeling like blasé or this kind of like malaise. And
Uh-huh.
so then I'd go back and be like, maybe it's because somebody screamed at me at the intersection or whatever. And so then I'd be like, oh, yeah, okay. And how did that make me feel? Well, it kind of made me feel like I did something wrong, even though I didn't do something wrong, So I had to be like really uh, kind of anthropological about my
Mhm.
own, yeah, emotional reaction. So I'd recognize maybe a physical symptom and then have to kind of like reverse engineer it back. Yeah. But then I'd start recognizing it faster. I mean, it's like everything, like learning the piano, like it's just a skill to be able to recognize your emotions and you'll get better the more you practice.
Right. So I guess yeah, and actually maybe I'm starting to do that already in terms of like oh shit, I'm afraid to call this person. Why? Oh, because you have to have an uncomfortable conversation. What does that mean? That means call them immediately, right
Yeah.
now. Let's jump
Yes.
into the conflict right away. And so that's
Yes.
kind of what I've been doing a little bit lately. As a matter of fact, I have a very uncomfortable conversation I have to have in person with someone today.
Nice.
And up until now, I mean, honestly, this conversation that we've been having for 2 hours now,
I
um,
know.
um, definitely, I'm almost looking forward to it.
Really?
Very strange. I don't know why. I just like because it's another opportunity for me to work out that muscle in not being controlled by my chicken feelings, by not
Yes.
mutilating my behavior, mutilating myself to make myself feel comfortable. It's like I'm trying to,
Yes.
it's exactly like, it's like I want to fit in this box. In order to fit in this box, I need to cut off my forearm, you know?
Isn't it gross? It
Yeah.
reminds me, the Cinderella story, like the original Grimm's Brothers Grimm or whatever story.
Yeah.
They're trying to fit into the crystal slipper,
Oh yeah.
right? Do you know
Uh-huh.
this part?
No.
Yeah, so the stepsisters are trying to fit into the crystal slipper because the stepmom's like, and if you're a fan of Stephen Sondheim and Into the Woods, it follows this plot, but it's like the stepmom is like, okay, sure, your foot doesn't fit in because your toe is too long, but let's
Mhm.
just cut off the toe, and then once you marry the prince, then you don't have to walk anyways, you know? And
Right.
so that's what they do. So the one sister cuts off the toe in order to
Uh-huh.
fit the slipper, but then the prince notices that there's blood and is like, "Hold it. No, I've been tricked." And then so goes back. The
Mhm.
second stepsister is like, "Oh, my heel is like too big, you know, to fit." And so the stepmom's like, "Let's just cut off the heel." You know, and again, once you're married to the prince, you won't have to walk.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And
Right.
so the cut off the heel, but that's exactly what it is. It's like, oh, I have to fit this whatever glass slipper, this arbitrary thing, and so I'm willing to self-mutilate.
Uh-huh. Wow, that's kind of amazing. That just made me realize that for a big chunk of my life, I've been trying to be a stepsister.
Yes. Yeah, and who wants to be the stepsister? Like if it doesn't fit, then move on.
Yeah.
We'll find the slipper that does fit.
Yeah.
You know, and know that there is like, you know, I don't agree with that many things about like, well, I don't know if I disagree or whatever. I don't really think about manifesting or whatever, but I do think that people that have a scarcity mindset are just wrong.
Uh-huh.
They're just wrong about reality. You know, there's an
Uh-huh.
abundance. There's actually an abundance. Yeah, if this slipper doesn't fit, there will be another slipper. I guarantee it. I will bet anybody a Chick-fil-A meal that that's true. If you find out after like 2 years of trying this or something that your life hasn't improved dramatically, then I owe you a Chick-fil-A meal of your choice. Large size it, you know, get the swap out the shake or whatever, all the
Uh-huh.
added cheeses or bacons that you want.
Oh my God. Yeah, I think everything is about perception. And if you if I perceive that there's only a little bit to go around, that's what I'm going to find.
And it will seem like there's only a little bit to go around too. It's like the Christmas parking lot, right? You're gonna
Yeah.
suddenly like it really does induce in a way the scarcity. And
Mhm.
it's not like rocket science or whatever. You can see why people being like hoarding toilet paper actually does make the toilet paper shortage. You
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, yeah.
So I disagree with people that people were hoarding toilet paper in that instance. But do you have kind of like so since you've touched on this a little bit, but like if you can just like and this is kind of a personal question, but if you can just like share just a little bit like maybe like how your world perspective has changed, you know, ever since kind of trying to be less influenced by others and the opinion of others. Do you like what are some of the adjectives that you would say kind of describe the difference in you or the difference in the way you see the world?
I'm trying to think of adjectives. I mean, I don't know. I think that my perception before attempting some of these things was that I mattered more.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Or that other people's opinions mattered. The value of people's opinions of me has gone down dramatically. Like I thought the stock was a lot higher. Um, that um, did that answer the question? I'm kind of
a
um,
little bit. So like what is it like what does it feel like, I guess, to kind of make that realization?
it feels really, really good. Like for instance, I keep referring back to this moment in which, this guy was like freaking out at me about the stop sign and how good that felt to me because before that I felt like I was like, oh my God, I just did this thing. Oh my God, it's how embarrassing that I ran a stop sign in this guy's neighborhood. I'm such a piece of shit.
Mm,
I grew up in a home where one of my parents was really verbally abusive and just like continually poking at things constantly. And so my perception of the world was that, everybody's
yeah,
poking, everybody's looking and poking. And the truth of the matter is, even if they are, who gives a shit?
right.
And it doesn't matter, and that person has no more value in this world than I do. And I feel like because I was doing an experiment that came to I was willing to take that risk, and embarrass myself and go out,
Mhm.
and I started doing that more often, and in other places, like at the airport or in other places, people would ask my opinion, and rather than on something at work, and rather than like saving somebody's feelings, um, I would find a nice way to tell the truth. I was like, "Oh yeah, this is great," instead of like, "I think we can do better,"
Yeah.
and or would you like to do blah blah blah, and to be like the guy that's not rocking the boat, I would say, "Oh yeah, sure," and instead I was saying, "No, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. No, I don't. I don't like this hotel. I'd rather go on this
Mhm.
airline." You know,
Mhm.
um, a lot more rocking of the boat. So I don't know
Yeah.
necessarily if it's adjectives as much as
Mhm.
me asserting myself.
But how does that feel, I guess?
It
Like, how
feels
does it feel to be willing to rock the boat and to actually do rock the boat a little bit
it feels
more?
exhilarating.
Nice.
It feels exhilarating. It feels like jumping out of an airplane sometimes.
Mhm.
Like I said, like this conflict I have later today, it's not even really a conflict. It's just an uncomfortable situation. I'm actually looking forward to it,
Mhm.
which is weird. When I woke up this morning, I was not. I was filled with anxiety. Honestly, I was like, I know I have to do this thing. I don't want to do it. Right now, I'm ready to put on the jumpsuit. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And it's pretty cool. Um,
Nice.
so I, yeah, yeah, I'm kind of grateful that I ran into, and like I said, I was doing research on something completely different, and that's how I found your book and how I found you. And what was interesting to me is a lot of your perceptions of the world seem to be the opposite of some of my neurosis. And I was like, you
Wow.
know what? I can cure this part of my brain that I want to cure by implementing some of these things to a certain safe degree. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I don't want to take myself to the point of where I'm, you know, trying to manipulate everything and being dishonest in order to do it. But I definitely need to stop cutting off limbs in the world.
Yes. Yes.
You
I mean,
know?
that's true. That's true of everybody. That's true of psychopaths.
Yeah.
Psychopaths do it, without kind of like realizing it because they manipulate themselves and others to get the outcome. So it's like there's that danger kind of no matter what you do. Man, that's so interesting. Um, I'm so glad, and I do think that this is right. Is what you were saying about like what does it mean to kind of cure these aspects of yourself? I think that it's just um what is kind of a good word for it? It's like a little bit of recovery. I think you used that word earlier, like I'm in
Yes.
recovery from manipulation. Like I
Yeah.
don't think it's actually becoming something different. I actually think it's becoming more of you, like it's
Mhm.
reversing some of the damage that like being mutilated. I forget that there was this I want to say it's Ta-Nehisi Coates, who African American author who said this about his daughters. He said there's something kind of, or somebody else. I keep trying to find this quote, and so I apologize for attributing it. But he says there's something really sad about being the parents of African American daughters is because they start off so themselves. They're so themselves, they're so who they are. And then eventually they kind of start picking up on the fact that the world sees them a particular way. And they start distorting themselves, in reaction to that. They try to avoid conflict, or they try to, avoid people thinking they're this when they're not. And so they're constantly trying to manage the expectations and the perceptions of other people around them. And he said that's like one of the saddest things about being the parent of African American girls. But I imagine that is terrible. But
Mhm.
I also think that there's something that about that experience that I identified with, and I bet a lot of people identify with, is how much hurting ourselves have we done over the years? How much distortion, how much kind of mutilation have we done? And so I do think that, whatever the process is, everybody has like different things. But this process of recovery, recovering those aspects of ourselves, recovering the fearless way that we used to engage with the world when we were children. I think that is probably the best thing that any of us could have, right? I think,
Yeah.
that would be kind of the ultimate goal for everybody, not necessarily the $1,000,000 by the time you're 30, but to have that fearless and joyful way of engaging with the world. So I'm really glad that you have, been so lion heart about this heart of a lion, about taking these risks. and embarking on this journey. I really appreciate that about you.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that I found that you exist and that I can use you as inspiration because I do think about it a lot. So I'm not kidding when I say there have been situations, and I think to myself, what would Emmy Thomas do right now? No
Uh-huh.
joke, no joke. And usually it involves me just like just not cutting off a limb, you know?
Yes.
I
Good.
mean, I didn't think that at the time, but now that's going to be a new thing for me. I'm no longer, I'm going to do my best to not mutilate on a
Yeah.
regular basis. It's going to take a long time. And I absolutely identify with what you were just talking. I don't remember the name of the author, but he was talking about his
Yeah.
daughters.
Hmm.
I think that everybody, um, I think that, I mean, one of the characteristics of being a human being is to try to fit into society so that you can survive, so that you are not ejected by the tribe,
Right.
which is what I think is in our inherent instincts. And so we kind of manipulate ourselves into making sure that we are able to stay, in the tribe and that we're not, and I've noticed also as I've been changing a little bit over the last couple of months that there are friends of mine who are uncomfortable with me being a little bit different than I used to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they like me in the pigeonhole that I was. I'm the guy, oh, he's the guy with three fingers and one hand, you
Mm.
know? And I'm trying to grow these fingers back,
Hmm.
or you know what I mean? And they're just not like,
Right.
oh, he's got a whole hand now. I don't understand this. You know what I
Right.
mean? And
Yeah.
I can see them where it doesn't really directly affect them. I'm not fitting the mold of what I used to. And it's
I
weird to
see.
them, you know?
Yeah, that's a little tricky. I
Mhm,
do think, as somebody who's kind of gone through something like that, as people have, I've come a little bit more forward about being psychopathic and like
mhm,
the way I think about the world and be about the world and trying to just be more true to myself, including those psychopathic aspects of myself. You know, not like I'm intentionally trying to hurt people, but there's like a lot of ways in which like my psychopathy just manifests itself in ways that are neutral, completely neutral. Like exactly as you say, they don't hurt the person or whatever, but maybe they're uncomfortable. The same way that you
mhm.
are uncomfortable with the story about the bike, right? Or worried
Yeah,
about what my friend might think, based
right.
on all this
Yeah.
stuff or whatever. And so just kind of being more open about stuff like that, there was definitely a transition and that is tricky, and it was kind of sad. And actually, Nedra Tawwab,
Mhm,
just had the post on her stories about this, about how all change involves grief,
mm,
because there's an acknowledgement of loss of the way things could have been if you had never mutilated yourself in the first place, loss of
mm,
things that might happen as a result of you restoring yourself back to what you were before, friends that may not be as good of friends or whatever else. But I found that, there definitely were losses for me. I lost a profession as a law professor.
mhm,
I lost some friends and stuff, but there were just other things that I gained, including just like a deep self-respect and sense of self-integrity, that
mhm.
just made me feel like it was all worth it. So I guess that's kind of the good news. But not to kind of delude you into thinking that it's not going to have like some bumps and people.
Oh yeah.
Like, there's a reason why people have this chicken fear is because people can be really cruel about certain things and,
Mhm.
like, kinda enforcing this fear on everyone else.
Yeah. Well, fear is a good controller. I mean, that's how.
On that note, do
Yeah.
you have anything else you wanna share?
No, 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 no. This has been probably a long episode, huh?
Well, it's yeah, a little bit longer, but yeah, it's been really good. I told you before we started recording that, like, intuition said I don't need to prepare anything. For this, but I feel like I've like really had like some great moments of self-reflection. So I really appreciate talking with you. And I just feel like you know the the idea of all the kind of pain and suffering that I went through, by self-mutilating. I just don't want anyone to have to think that that's the only way, that that's their only choice, that's kind of being forced on them, and to live in that world of resentment and kind of disempowerment, that kind of breeds. And so I just really appreciate talking with you and giving the chance to kind of talk about this particular topic,
Mhm.
which I think applies both to psychopaths and non-psychopaths, but kind of in different ways.
Yeah.
We tend to go one way or the other to some of the extremes, either uh not taking into consideration our emotions enough or taking them into too much consideration,
Mhm.
including being so fearful and acting primarily from a place of fear. So I really appreciate this, and I hope that we can get you back on and do a
Sure.
part three. Who knows what it
Mhm.
will be about? It'll probably be about whatever you prompt me to talk
Hopefully,
about
it's not.
again.
I'm not coming to you live from a hospital bed. Like
Even if you do.
one too many stop signs.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I'll get you on. We'll stay in contact and then we'll get a update on you in maybe a few months or something.
Sure, that'd be great.
All right, sounds good. We'll
All
talk
right.
to you soon.
Okay.